Welcome everyone to We Are Endurance webinar series. Today we have a special guest. His name is Brian Fallon, and he is a triathlon coach. And also, as I said in my email, he's a kick-ass swimmer. And I know, he also coaches swimming. But today we're going to be talking about breathing and running. And I'm going to hand it over to Brian to take over the presentation. Thank you, Brian.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Brian. And like Hillary said, I'm a triathlon and paratriathlon coach and a swim coach. I've been swimming with XL Masters for probably close to 20 years now, maybe a little over. Coaching with them for about 15. One of the silver linings of the pandemic was I stumbled across something relating to breathing while running and syncing the breath to your running strides. And this is something that a lot of the elite coaches, elite athletes have been doing for a long time. It's not anything, new, but what I'm doing, and I'm going to start screen sharing here, is take the concept and I'm bringing it down to the level of everyday runners. So everything that I've found about this technique was all about the top end, high performance running, trying to get that extra 1% performance, which it's, perfectly suited for and, a good thing to do. But when I started to
I think, Brian, did you freeze? Okay, I think he's frozen, but I'm sure he's going to jump back on. So just stay tuned. Everybody hears me, right? I'm not frozen. Okay, that's him. Okay, he went out and he'll come back. So just stay tuned and I'll put the recording on pause for now.
So, okay, so as I was saying, when I started to find out about this research, I started reflecting on my swimming background and how this breathing with swimming is so tightly correlated. And so some of the things that I found is how our breathing really impacts everything about our running, because all of our core musculature is in play while we're running, because we have no choice but to be breathing. And it really becomes a very intense community involvement. So the basic concept is coordinating your inhales and exhales with your cadence. And the purpose, it helps to control your pace, it balances out the muscular patterns, and it helps maximize your aerobic effectiveness, partly because of the way you breathe, and partly because of being able to breathe more effectively allows you to get more air into your lungs and your body absorb more oxygen, therefore. Come up with 4 basic breathing patterns, and I'll go through those here in a second. And they each have a basic role, and there's 2 variations per breathing pattern. And important thing is that none of this competes with or tries to replace any other running technique that's out there. I know like Hillary in your group is big on the run walk method. This would be a nice complement. It does not replace, it's not in competition. It's something you can do as an additive. And if for whatever reason you find it too difficult to do, don't worry about it. You just breathe. You know, it's not an end all be all kind of thing. It's a metric. It's there to assist. And if it doesn't work for you, c'est la vie. You know, I've got one of my runners just never really got into the groove of this thing, so he doesn't bother with it. But everybody else that I've trained have found it to be extremely useful. So let's get right into it. So basic things are 9-step breathing pattern. It can be either a 5 inhale, 4 exhale. And let's see if I can get this to animate. So these are the longest patterns that I use. These are primarily for warm up, for recovery, for cool down. But they can be used for other things as well. Then there's the 7-step pattern, 4 in, 3 out, or 3 in, 4 out. And this is just slightly above that. Both the 9 and the 7-step would basically fall into the category of conversational pace. So that's one of the things that got me down this road, because I've always heard, you know, your easy run should be at a conversational pace. I do most of my runs on my own. So who am I conversing with? How do I know that I'm staying in the right zone? And what I found is I'm able to use these patterns as a metric to help gauge my effort level. And that, you know, if I'm comfortably breathing in these patterns, and I know I'm right in the right zone that I need to be. Now, as we start to step the effort up, we go to a 5-step pattern. Now, this is starting where you're starting to work, but you still got plenty left to go in the tank. But you're definitely, you know, moving faster. Your heart rate definitely elevated, and yet, again, this is a good breathing pattern for a. This basically, the 9 and 7 basically correlate. The 9's basically your marathon pace, 7 half marathon, 5 10K, and then you get to 3, which would be your 5K. This is where you're running fast. This is running really hard, hill running, those kind of things. And I give the 2-1 and the 1-2, but at this pace, you're pretty close to your maximum efforts. So it's, there's not a lot of difference that you feel. One of the reasons why I do 2 different patterns on these is because, especially with the 9 and the 7, to do a 5-step inhale, it takes that period of time to get that inhale in and that long exhale. That there's approximately, what I found for me, a 10% difference in pace between if the integer is larger than the numerator. The longer inhale patterns just helps suppress my pace about 10% more. So why the odd even pattern? So this is one of the things, and it's based off the guy who basically invented this. Although I don't think, he necessarily quote unquote invented it, but he's the one that is the first one to actually get it down in writing. But he basically wrote how when he started to discover the breathing patterns and stuff, and he started working on them, if he was running on an even breathing pattern, so his exhale always started on the same leg, he felt very lopsided, very uneven. And he started to, realize that he always had this series of niggling injuries on one side, hip issues, knee, calf strains, etc. And when he went to an odd even pattern, so every time that initial exhale starts, it was starting on the opposite leg.
Oh, no.
That it just balanced things out for him. And so this is, a big part of what this is all about, is just trying to balance the load more evenly as you're running. And a big part of this is because, again, the diaphragm, a lot of people don't realize how intricately it's wrapped around and provides support for the spine. And all the hip flexor muscles and everything that we're relying on in our deep core are integrated with the diaphragm and how it's moving and reacting. So the better that we can keep our canister, that, oops, didn't want to do that. Sorry. I'll just move on. But the better we maintain our canister, the chest through the abdomen to the pelvis, so that we get maximum deflection of the diaphragm, the better all the stabilizer muscles through our core and hips are going to be able to operate. If we're hunching over or we're running lopsided, there's unevenness in our gaits and stuff, those are going to limit eventually how deeply we can take a breath. So these are all parts that come into it. And just to make sure that we're all on the same page, just want to make sure we all understand there's step rate, cadence, the number of steps per minute. And then there's the stride length, the distance between one footfall to the next on the same leg. And so a big part of the long breath patterns, the 9 and the 7 step, is that in order to breathe on these long patterns, if you take long loping strides while trying to run slow, you're never going to be able to do this, because it takes just physically too long to try to pull in the air and expel the air, and you're going to be exhausted inside of 100 meters. So what it forces you to do is shorten your stride. So you take shorter, faster steps. I'm sure a lot of you have always heard that, like, the top runners have a cadence rate of 180, in that range. That's really fast. All right. If you think about it, 180 or 90 per on one side, that's 3 steps per second. So what I've found though is that during my training runs, and again, this is a big part of the breath running concept, is that this is built around training. On my training runs, if I keep my cadence up while I'm doing my easy runs, then neurologically, I'm priming my system to be able to operate at that higher cadence, so that when I start to pick up the speed, the only thing I'm doing is letting my stride length expand naturally. And the rate at which my feet are turning over is staying the same, basically, so that there's not a big gear shift between my easy running and my fast running, that I'm able to bring my effort levels up just that much easier. Now, when you get to the short breath patterns, like I said, that's when you're starting to really work. This is when you're starting to run faster. And I caught this little Instagram post of, I believe these are either Kenyan or Ethiopian runners on a treadmill doing a tempo run. And you just see how, my cursor's jumping around on me, how easy and smooth their stride is. Again, this is tempo. This is their middle effort. All right. But that's what a 180 cadence looks like. But you can see how smooth, and the coaches yelling at them as they're doing this, if you get the full video, to run smooth, run easy. So they've got the pace up, but they're trying to be as relaxed and smooth as they can while they're doing it. So, oops, jumped through that. There we go. So what I've been able to do, again, assuming a 180 pace, just because it makes the math easier, you can see how you get the natural J curve of breaths per minute with these things. So when I'm down on my long, easy runs, I'm only getting between 20 to 26 breaths per minute. So I'm pulling in, as reference, when we're sitting here on Zoom, we'd be taking roughly 12 to 15 breaths per minute. So breathing is elevated, but not ridiculously so. When I get up to my 5-step pattern, now I'm up to 35 to 40. I'm definitely breathing much more and stuff. And when I get to the 3-step, now I'm rolling really fast. I can be up to 60 breaths per minute, and going on from there. So the thing about the breathing while running is it does not matter how much air you pull into your lungs. What matters is how much oxygen gets to your muscles and how efficiently your body uses that oxygen. And this is the key to the easy running, because you have to run at a pace just high enough to stimulate your system to make adaptations, but at a low enough effort level that it allows your body to be able to then, during the rest and repair period, post running and while you're sleeping, to build more capillaries through your muscle beds, to be able to get more mitochondria into your muscle fibers, to let the mitochondria get more efficient and effective in burning the fuel to create the power needed. So to give your heart and your blood vessels the chance to be able to really open up to allow the blood volume to flow better through your body. So this is why you've got to take it easy on the training runs that are meant to be easy. If you're always running hard, your body is only going to be repairing damage. It's not going to be creating adaptation. And this is really interesting that I found. And this is a very simplified thing based on actual research. And I took out a lot of the mumbo jumbo scientific nomenclature. But, the lactate concentration in our blood is the determinant for our maximum abilities. For somebody who's not very well trained, somebody who's just getting into running, things like that, sitting in a chair, you've got a lactate of about 1 millimole per liter. As you start to move through your zones, it gets up, and they generally will have a point of exhaustion. They can only handle about 6 to 7 millimole lactate per liter flowing through their blood, and that's it. They're done. And their VO2 is roughly going to arc through like that. So their maximum VO2 levels are going to be able to, max out, in around 40-ish range. When you move down to a moderately trained, basically most of us, our resting lactate level goes just a little bit lower because we've been training, so our body's more efficient. And we're able to stretch out our zones through a wider range of paces and handle a higher lactate level in our bloodstream. And our VO2 commensurately goes up, and it'll be somewhere around 40 to 50, maybe a little bit more for some people, for a moderately trained person. Then when you get to the elites, they sit at about half a millimole when they're at rest. They're using so little lactate, and they're into zone 3 before they're coming much above 1 millimole. Again, this is based on real research. And it's not until they're going into zone 4 do they really start to go, and they can go up to 8, 9, 10 millimole before they hit their exhaustion. And their VO2, it can be, these numbers aren't really, to scale necessarily, but they'll be up 50, 60, 70, 80, well, not 80, but, 60, 70% on VO2. So the thing that's really interesting, and this again is why running at an easy pace is so important. If you take a untrained person pushing right to the limits of their ability, that's only zone 3 for us. And for an elite, they're still down in zone 2. For us, when we're at the limits of our ability, guess what? The elites are just now at the top of zone 3 coming into zone 4, and they've still got all of this available. That's why they're elites. So this is one of the keys to the breath running, is that we get so wrapped up with the numbers. We got the fancy watches with the heart rates and the pacings and all these metrics. But at the end of the day, you can only do what your body on that day can actually do. And that's always slightly variable because of any number of issues, be it how well did I sleep? How well did I eat the day before? What kind of life stress am I dealing with? Am I under fire at work? Am I having personal issues? Is somebody sick in my family? Am I fighting a bug? What's the weather like? Is it hot and steamy? Am I at altitude? Is it severely cold? All these things can change exactly what numbers show up on our watches and things. So if we use our breathing effort as the metric, then we're allowing our body to naturally settle itself into the pace it needs on the day to maximize the effectiveness of whatever the workout is. And real world examples. When I first came across this and I practiced it, trained through the whole summer, and this is during 2020, during COVID. So I did back-to-back virtual half marathons. And I did them as training runs specifically to test this theory out. And again, this is a, scientific experiment of one. But first time I did it, I did basically the Cow Harbor 10K course, and with some addition, and so very hilly. And I started off using the 5-4 for about the first 10 minutes, switched up to 4-5, so 9-step for about the first 30 minutes roughly, then switched to 4-3 and then 3-4 for the majority. And then as I was getting down into the last part, switched to 3-2. And again, I kind of timed it somewhat with the elevations that I was dealing with. So I did 3-2 going up, 2-3 coming down, and then this is Scudder. So I was coming right up from Scudder and up, and then 2-1 on the last thing. All right. Notice this yellow line here. That's my cadence. So except for those few points where I had to like slow down for traffic or whatever, my cadence was very, very steady throughout. This is my pace and this is my heart rate. And then the next weekend, I did another one, this time staying on the flat terrain. So it looks hilly here, but this is really flat. And again, cadence, just ever so slightly did the cadence build. My pace, I was able to keep it on a nice steady trajectory up, as well as my heart rate. Kept my heart rate smooth, controlled, right to the finish, using roughly the same type of strategy. And again, these are training. These were not races, virtual, but I wasn't worried about the times. So I was doing this strictly to test how these breathing patterns would actually work on something like this. For a little bit more data, if I got my Garmin data, this was the Cow Harbor one, and then this is the flat one. So again, this is my pace, my heart rate, and you can see my ground contact times, my cadence, my respiration rates, how they just steadily grew, and my stride length, how it stayed nice and steady with a very gentle rise. All right. Then This is one of my athletes. This is 2021, it's February. He did basically a half marathon in his neighborhood on his own. But this was before he started working with me. So you can see his pace and his heart rate. Those are the only things that he had. He had to take a break, basically, catch his breath, and then finished out. I think this was stopped for traffic. I'm not sure. But then, tried to finish strong. But you could see how jagged both the pace and the heart rate is. So the next year, this is the Long Island half marathon. Cadence, heart rate, and pace using the breathing method. So you can just see, if you learn to breathe in sync with your cadence, everything smooths out on your runs. Why is that important? History, since yogis have been around, and science has proven this to be true. If you breathe in deeply and intentionally, you will lower your heart rate, lower your blood pressure, and improve your mood and cognition, how well you think. So what happens if you breathe deeply and intentionally while running? You lower your heart rate from what it was to what it could be. You lower your blood pressure. You improve your mood while running. Try doing that during a race. Who's going to have a better race? People running at the same pace, but you've got a lower heart rate, lower blood pressure, and better attitude. How do you think you're going to do in the last half mile of that race? Because you can get all the data you want, but at the end of the day, we are analog. And that's breath running. Any questions?
I have a couple of questions, Brian.
Yes, ma'am.
So talk to us about how you would do, your 7.5 or not, whatever it is. How would you do that? Like, can you demonstrate that for us?
Right. So on a 9-step pattern, I'll just do the 4 in, 5 out.
Okay.
And try to, I don't know, can you hear me tapping? So just, so it's just, I'm just smoothly pulling in, smoothly exhaling. This is something I'm working on trying to do, is get myself video. I just haven't been able to, get it done yet. But it's just a smooth, constant in and out, trying to keep my breathing as smooth as possible. And then as the effort level comes up, I can switch up the breathing. Part of the concept with this is, if the training run is saying stay in this breath pace, in this breath count, then if you're running and you're finding it too difficult to stay at these longer breath counts, that's the signal that you're breathing, that you're running too hard, and you've got to back it off. And in order, what you should do is basically stand up straighter, come up more. So get your canister better aligned, shorten your stride rate, pick up the cadence a little bit so that you come back down, but back it off. Don't try to push the pace while trying to breathe.
That was my next question, because a lot of people, most people, don't breathe properly. I know I don't. To breathe through your diaphragm is very difficult, especially if you didn't learn that, as a child, taking voice lessons, right? So how do you practice breathing from your diaphragm, right? And the other question I have for you is, should you be breathing in and out of your nose when you're doing this run?
Right. So I'm going to address those things first. So I've gone down a lot of rabbit holes on this. Nose breathing is a good thing. It's very, very healthy because it's your natural air filter. Our sinuses exist at 80 degrees Fahrenheit and 80% humidity. So the air coming into our lungs through our sinuses are pre-warmed and pre-humidified. So breathing through the nose is a good thing. That being said, when you're running, you're operating at an elevated effort level. So there's a reason why we can breathe through our nose or through our mouth, because there comes that point at which breathing through the nose just becomes impractical. You cannot pull in enough oxygen. And if you try, our noses are designed to collapse in if you're breathing too hard, to force you to breathe in through your mouth. So don't try to artificially maintain something like nose breathing or any other kind of restricted breathing devices or something like that, thinking that you're going to be getting some big benefit. The long step patterns, the 9-step and the 7-step, you should be able to breathe in through the nose. On the 9-step, a lot of times I can breathe in and out through my nose. On the 7-step, I'll breathe in through the nose, out through the mouth. By the time I get to the 5-step, that's out the window. And the 3-step, there's no way. You're breathing hard at that point. You're at your maximum. So if you can, great. But if you can't, don't worry about it. Don't artificially limit yourself to achieve some idealized goal that's not realistic. Listen to your body. That's what this program is all about, is listen to your body, honor what your body needs, and set yourself up so that you are able to build the base needed to be able to perform at the highest level that you can when you're done with your training. Something else too, to dovetail onto that, is I mentioned the restrictive breathing devices. I'm sure you've seen ads and stuff like that for these and stuff that, or people, wearing the masks while on the treadmill because, they're oxygen restricting and they're, simulating altitude. No, you're not. No, that's bro science. That's bullshit. That is not what's happening. All right. There is the same exact amount of oxygen at sea level as there is on top of Pikes Peak. What their difference is the partial pressure, the actual density of the air. So the air's thinner at high altitudes because there's less pressure, there's less atmosphere stacked on top of it. Just the same way, if you dive to the bottom of the pool, you feel the pressure in your ears much more than when you're on the surface, because there's more water stacked on top of water that creates pressure. So when you're at sea level, you've got a lot of pressure. When you're at altitude, you don't. You can't simulate that loss of pressure with a mask or a restrictive breathing device. All right, it's a chemical thing. So unless you're in a absolute sealed room where they can literally lower the pressure, like you're in, going up in an airplane, there's no way that you're going to be able to simulate that. But on a day like today, where it's nice and humid, anytime there's, hot and humid, especially, guess what? There's a loss of pressure in the air, because basically the water molecules are taking up space in that cubic centimeter. So there's not as many free oxygen molecules available. So there is actually less oxygen pressure. So running when it's hot and humid is the closest simulation that you're going to get to running at altitude. But that being said, you're also sucking in an awful lot of oxygen into your lungs. And if you're fighting a cold or something like that, you got the sniffles, that may not be the smartest thing to be doing. I don't want anybody to get pneumonia. So again, listen to your body, do what you need to do for yourself on the day, and then you'll be able to get the best benefits.
Hey, Brian, I had a question. You were talking earlier about, the benefits of shortening your stride, to increase your cadence. And it reminded me when I first joined Hillary's group, we did a lot of stride drills to do just that. Is there any kind of specific rules that you would recommend on, learning how to breathe in a new pattern like this, other than just really focus on the number of steps you're taking for each breath?
Yeah, it can be a little bit confusing at first. What I've had some people do is there's apps that you can get on your phone that are metronomes. And the important thing is figure out what your cadence is. Don't try to artificially be at 180 if you're not used to running at that rapid of a step pace, because it's going to be too hard. Try to find approximately where yours is, set the metronome, and use it as a way to help you keep that cadence, and then just kind of play with how short or how long can I have my cadence while I'm running, and be comfortable in this breathing rhythm. And a big part of why I advocate shortening up the stride length is our bones are nothing more than a series of crystals stacked on top of one another. And, if you take like two pieces of flint and strike them against each other, you get sparks, because flint is a type of crystallized mineral. And there's a specific name which escapes me at the moment, but those sparks are created when those crystals rub against each other. All right, our bones are basically that same type of crystal structure, so that if you're putting enough impact in on the bone, you're basically sending those crystals against each other, causing those sparks, which done enough, long enough, hard enough, you're going to start creating fissures, which is what the bone fractures, shin splints, and those kind of things are. So those are usually caused by overstriding, because you're striking just too hard on the landing, because you're trying to reach out in front too deep. So what I try to advocate is making sure you're keeping your feet underneath you and then kicking them out the back. So think about how your feet are going behind you, not going in front of you for the steps. And the faster you're able to get that cadence, again, you're teaching your neurological system to operate at this quicker rate. And then as you start to pick up the pace and your breathing patterns shorten, you're naturally going to be able to extend without taxing your nervous system to suddenly get your legs moving faster. They're already moving fast. And just naturally going to let the stride length come out. And that's going to allow the bones, ligaments, tendons, the time they need to be able to withstand the constant punishment that running delivers, because you're giving it to them in small measured amounts, training run to training run, rather than blasting them with a bunch of damage that they need 5 to 7 days to repair, but you're running every other day. Does that answer it?
Yeah, thank you.
Anybody else?
I have another question. While you're talking
Sure.
about breathing, it struck me, how you emphasize so much breathing during swimming and how you should be, through bilateral breathing, trying to relax while breathing, not be, not hold your breath, not stress. Is there an emphasis in proper breathing with being relaxed while while running as well?
Yeah. And yeah, this is also part of the things I've discovered is the diaphragm is very unique in that it is one of the few major muscles in our body that does not have an antagonist. Every other muscle in our body is basically centered around a joint. And there's a protagonist and an antagonist. So if I want to move my arm, if I bring it into me, my bicep has to contract, but my tricep has to extend. Now to straighten my arm back out, my bicep has to extend, my tricep contracts. All right. Our diaphragm, it contracts or it doesn't. All it does is contract and relax. There's no antagonist to it. The exhale happens with the core muscles from our transverse abdominis, which is the very deep inner layer of abdominal muscles, which runs 360 degrees around us like a girdle, down into the pelvic bone and the pelvic girdle. So on the exhale, the diaphragm just relaxes. It's the transverse and the other core muscles that are contracting in, and the pelvic floor coming up to push the air out. And of course, all the muscles of the rib cage are acting in concert with this as well. So again, if you've got a good tall posture and you're keeping your chest centered above your hips, you're allowing the maximum deflection of not only the diaphragm on the inhale, but also your core and pelvic muscles to be able to fully push on the exhale. And what you'll find is, especially on the 9-step breathing pattern, that you're basically doing stomach crunches, but you're doing them, in a 360-degree way. So you're doing, dozens upon dozens of crunches per minute. while running. So if you're able to keep this nice steady pace, quick rhythm, working on nice deep inhales and exhales, you're really working your core. And that's going to be what sets you up to be able to maintain the higher effort levels for your 5K race and things like that, for the last 2 miles of your half marathon or marathon, that your core is going to be there to support you, to really keep you in check. And you've been training your body to be able to pull in a maximum volume of air. And because you're running at such a low heart rate, and again, this is the idea with the breath running, using the breathing patterns, so you don't have to pay attention to things like pace, heart rate, anything else. Just let the breathing let you go. But if you've got them, when you're done and you look back, you'll start to find that those breathing patterns match the heart rates and the paces pretty closely to what your goals are for a marathon, half marathon, 10K pace, etc. And it's basically what I've done is a poor man's version of the MAF method, the maximum aerobic function that was started by Dr. McCaffrey. And if you're not familiar with this, he's the guy that helped Mark Allen, the 6-time Ironman world triathlon champion, become the 6-time Ironman world champion. You know, Mark Allen had been battling Dave Scott back in the 80s, could never beat Dave Scott, and was getting really frustrated. He'd cream everybody else in any other race, but he'd get to Hawaii, get up against Dave Scott, and lose every time. So he started working with Dr. Maff, and Dr. Maff had this theory that running at really low heart rate was the key to being able to run really fast. So he figured out what Mark's heart rate ranges were and basically gave him a number and said, go out and, run your training run at this heart rate. Don't go above this heart rate. And Mark went out, ran it, came back. Doc's like, how was that? And Mark's like, that was stupid. It was such a low heart rate. I was having to walk the hills to stay underneath it. And the doc said, perfect. Keep doing that. Do not go above that heart rate on these long training runs. He bought into it, kept doing it. Over the course of several weeks, he got to where he could just slowly jog up the hills and stay underneath that heart rate. And couple months into his training, he was finding he was able to run fairly consistently at this very low heart rate for the entire training run. And as he got into his final block just before the race, he found he was running at his goal Ironman marathon pace at that heart rate. He kept his heart rate low for months and months and months and let his body develop to be able to use all of the efficiencies of that low heart rate in order to then run at the pace he needed to run in order to win the race. And that's the year he finally beat Dave Scott and then went on to win it 5 more times after that. So that's kind of the framework upon which I've structured my breath running philosophy. But again, going back to those graphs I was showing between the untrained versus the elites, Mark Allen was an elite. he has this enormous range. He's got a resting heart rate down in the 30s and a max heart rate of 200 or something. You know, he's got this incredible range and a very well-developed body that's used to going at these incredible times and distances. That's not me. I can't do that. So my window for heart rates is very, very small comparatively. So each chunk, my marathon versus half marathon, 10K versus 5K, they're very tiny chunks of heart rate differences relatively. You know, there may be only an 8 to 10 point spread. And guess what? Depending on how my body is doing on the day, how the weather's doing on the day, those numbers can shift around. If I'm always trying to lock in on a specific number, because one day, a couple of months ago, I decided that was a number. Well, is that now several months later, is that the valid number? You know, unless I'm continually testing myself, I don't really know. And the fact of the matter is, unless I'm doing lactate testing on myself through the different zones, I'm just guessing. I don't actually know. So this, what I found is by using my breathing method, that if I keep myself in that deep aerobic zone on the 9-step, 7-step, then when it comes to the 5 and 3 on my higher effort runs, instead of being a ceiling limiting my pace, those shorter breathing patterns become the floor that helps support the higher pace. So that as I start to fatigue, I depend on the breathing pattern to keep me up at that elevated effort level. You know, I'm having a tough time this year personally with my asthma. You know, I've had my lungs checked and everything. I'm all good as far as the doctors are concerned. But anytime I try to push it, my asthma kicks in and I'm getting shut down. Well, I just did the tough cookie 8K race in Sunken Meadow. If any of you guys have done that, it's a really tough course. And I was able to, you know, get through it with a relatively decent time, even with all the crazy hills and everything, because I was able to use a breathing pattern that helped keep me at a level of intensity that did not wipe me out too soon, that I was completely toast, you know, a mile from the finish line, and, you know, allowed me to come in as strong as I could. I definitely did not have my best time by a long shot, but I wasn't that far off of my times that I was expecting either.
Awesome.
And that's while wheezing hard.
Brian, thank you very much. I'm sorry to cut you off, but
No, I'm sorry,
our time is
I get
up.
talky.
So I just have to say thank you very much. And just quickly give us your email address in case anybody has any questions.
Sure. Easiest one is Coach Brian at breathrunner.com.
Terrific. Thank you again. And thank you all for coming, and we'll see you next week.
All right. Thanks so much, Hillary.